Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're discussing how to fill job market gaps through a skills-first approach. As job markets adapt to changing technologies, there's a clear demand for skills that fill employment gaps. Big data experts, AI specialists, cybersecurity roles. These are just some of the fields with shortages or expected shortages in the years to come. And it's not just the world of tech. Globally, the World Health Organization projects a shortfall of some 10 million healthcare workers in just 6 years' time. So what should policymakers and employers be doing about it? Well, in this webinar, the argument will be made that traditional hiring methods need to change, to quit focusing on academic qualifications and specific job titles, and instead take a skills-first approach. What does that involve? Well, we will have a panel discussion in a moment. But first up, here is the OECD policy analyst, Ivan Bornicelli, who's going to give us an overview of some of the OECD's work in this area. Ivan, over to you.
Thank you, Duncan. Just allow me to share my screen very quickly. And I'm going to be with all of you in a few, just give me 1 second. So just let me know if everyone can see my screen, and I will jump on my presentation right away. Is all good? Okay, I'm going to assume that all's good. So thank you, Duncan, for the quick introduction. And in this short presentation, I'm going to give you a glimpse of the project Beyond Degrees, empowering the workforce in the context of the skill-first. But before doing so, allow me to provide some context. In the last decades, labor market has gone through important changes, driven mainly by digital and the green transition. This has manifested in a number of ways. The level of skill imbalances and skill shortages has increased very rapidly. The share of employers struggling to fill vacancies has nearly doubled in recent years. Also, the ways in which people learn are undergoing significant transformation, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, on average in EU countries, the participation of non-formal and informal learning has reached 41% and 60% in 2022, respectively, exceeding the pre-pandemic levels. In addition to these facts, and as response, more employers are transitioning towards implementing skill-based hiring practices. The data from the United States, for example, showed that in 2022, the number of roles that removed the degree requirements was 5 times higher than it was in 2014. Then it's clear that the tight labor market, the skill shortages, and changes in how people learn have led employers to shift towards alternative hiring methods. Therefore, the OECD Center for Skills, with the support of LinkedIn, is carrying out this project to understand what skill-first approaches look like presently, with a particular focus on skill signaling done by individuals. We also want to identify what type of skills-first practices could work in different contexts, where they could address skill shortages by expanding and diversifying the workforce, as well as the strategies and policies that could support this initiative. Just to give you a taste of what we are doing in this project, our preliminary findings show that a diverse group could benefit from skill-first approaches. We're focusing here on people in and out of the workforce without higher or vocational education, and who are struggling to find a new or different job opportunity, or have already given up trying to find that job due to the perceived lack of availability. We found that on average in EU countries, 23% of the workforce can benefit from skill-first approaches. And as you can see from the graph, older adults, men with upper secondary education only, migrants, and individuals in rural areas are all more likely to benefit from it. These results illuminate the fact that skill-first approaches could address a number of labor market inefficiencies that are also harming individuals. For example, helping migrants educated in different national education system or otherwise skilled through alternative ways to find employment. Workers in rural areas or those transitioning from declining industries such as high emission sectors can also greatly benefit from these approaches. Multiple strategies and policies are taking place to create a more adaptable, inclusive workforce through a skill-first approach. Here are some examples. In Colombia, we can highlight the case of Noto from EAFIT University, which provide credentials co-designed with employers from tech and AI industry and tailored to learners' needs. In the European Union, Europass store, certify, and share their skills and learning records. This allows to individuals register to the Europass to build online portfolios, making it easier to apply for jobs. In the United States, we have organizations such as Opportunity at Work that support equitable hiring by prioritizing skills over traditional credentials and promoting partnerships with employers. And with this brief introduction, I hand it over to you, Duncan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ivan, for that opening presentation. Very interesting indeed. And I'm glad to say that we can get some further insights on some of the ideas that Ivan was just mentioning there from Sharat Raghavan, a Director of Research from LinkedIn. Sharat, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you, Duncan. Really excited to be here. LinkedIn's super thrilled to be partnering with the OECD Center for Skills to really look at this perspective of how skills first can affect the labor market. Now, I'd like to actually share some slides, but before I go and do that, let me just quickly introduce myself. So I am Director of Research of the Economic Graph at LinkedIn. So I have the great fortune of looking at LinkedIn data to analyze trends in the labor market. Now, what does this LinkedIn data look like? And let me actually show that. 1 second as I share my screen. All right. So we base our data on we call the LinkedIn Economic Graph. That's over 1 billion members on our platform. We just crossed that recently. Over 67 million companies, 15 million jobs, and most critically, 41,000 skills that our LinkedIn members list on their profile. Now, this data, which we call the economic graph, allows us to analyze trends in the labor market. Now, in terms of a skills first lens, we often like to say it's skills, not schools, when we talk about the labor market and our vision for it. And some recent labor market trends that we've been analyzing here at LinkedIn. Number one, these are themes you probably have heard about in the news, right? The Great Reshuffle to the Great Stay. There was this incredible transitionary period where people shifted jobs, right after the pandemic, and that has turned into a situation where attrition is actually falling to lows that many developed economies have not seen before. Skills, and I put in quotes, the rise of AI. Now, I should probably say the rise of generative AI, but AI is something that we've always looked at. In fact, we've had a great partnership with the OECD looking at AI data for a long time. And then finally, kind of labor participation and macro trends. It's no surprise in a lot of economies that labor participation has not recovered since the pandemic. And that actually augurs for a more important look at skills first in order to solve these labor market gaps like we're just seeing before. Now, I find an interesting stat from our data that shows you how dynamic the labor market is. We publish something called the Jobs on the Rise list. It's basically jobs that are sort of emerging in our ecosystem at LinkedIn. And if we look at the list from this year, over 68% of these jobs did not exist 20 years ago. Right? Think about jobs like sustainability analyst or social media influencer, right? Prompt engineer. So this just shows you how much turnover and dynamic, how it's such a dynamic labor market that we kind of live in today. Speaking of AI talent is extremely important for a lot of economies, and I thought it'd be interesting to show how much demand there is. This graph is showing the hiring rate. So this is something that we calculate on our side at LinkedIn. It's effectively hiring events of AI talent. And you can see across these major economies, right, that has been basically going, up and to the right since 2018. right? And so it just shows you the kind of the demand for this AI talent, which doesn't necessarily have to be filled with formal education, right? Skills, learning on the job, all of these can be a part of the basis of filling this gaps. We also comment and talk about GAI. And so one of our stats that we like saying is that when we look at the average job posting on our platform in 2015 and we compare it to a job posting just past 2020, right? 25% of those jobs, the skill sets have changed, right? That's about over a 7-year period. We expect that change to accelerate. So if you take a look at the average job posting in 2015, we expect that to change by over 65% by 2030, right? And primarily, we attribute this increase from 60 to 65 because of generative AI technologies, which again argues that companies, economies, policymakers really need to take a deep look at skills and how they're changing. Now, we have a research pillar on our team focused on equity. And there's a lot of data here, but I want to center you on really two things. One is that those center bars on the left side, right? This looks at how GAI is potentially going to affect women and younger workers. And we find that for women, we expect them to be disrupted by generative AI technologies disproportionately to men. Similarly, we expect as you can see, Generation Z to be affected disproportionately to other generations, right? So this really is an important takeaway in that they are effects that are not going to be borne equally by members of our workforce, and we must be cognizant of that. So what can we say about Skills First? We actually have a report that we published that looked at what a company or countries could do when they opened up sort of the aperture, right, and looked at a skills first hiring perspective. We found that talent pools would expand almost 10x when using a skills first approach. So this seems like a no-brainer if you are a company or an employer that's struggling to find people to fill roles. We also find that a skills-first approach like this will benefit a lot of groups that we just saw before that could be disproportionately affected. For example, we see a more of effect for women, this benefit, right? You could get more women in the talent pool if you took this skills-first approach. So all of these hopefully give you a little bit of a basis, right, of what we're looking at LinkedIn and what we're sort of excited about to partner with the OECD.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Sharat from LinkedIn there. To those watching, if you were checking out your LinkedIns during that searching for jobs, stop right now. Instead, get involved with our chat function. It's at the bottom of your screens. You can write in your questions and comments. Please do keep them short and concise. I see that James Michael Walker is already getting involved with a number of comments. He writes, there's a significant talent shortage. Employers can't find the skills they need. That is one comment which I'm sure many people would agree with. Now, though, let's get this panel discussion started. On the panel today, World Skills Champion Daniel McCabe. World Skills is an international competition that promotes vocational skills and training. Mariana Batista, Senior Advisor on Education and Skills at Wind Europe, a trade organization that's focused on wind energy. Jose Betancourt, Director of NODU, a tech-focused training center, EAFIT University in Colombia. And Papia de Broy, Senior Vice President of Research and Insight from the nonprofit Opportunity at Work that promotes inclusion in the workplace. Thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us today. Let's kick things off by talking about what a skills-first approach can mean in different contexts and why it is so important. Papia de Broy from Opportunity at Work, let's start with you. Should employers concentrate less on academic qualifications then and more on specific skill sets?
Thanks so much for the question, Duncan. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here with all of you today. Maybe for some context, here in the United States, over half of the workforce is skilled through an alternative route to a bachelor's degree. We call that population here STARS, is the acronym Skilled Through Alternative Routes. And what we find here is that, this is an absolutely massive pool of talent in the US that have developed their skills through community college, through certificate programs, on the job. And when employers screen out, use a degree to screen people out, they're actually screening out almost 80% of our Hispanic workers, almost 70% of our Black workers, 70% of our rural workers, our veterans. And what we've seen over the last generation in this country is almost 70% of new jobs in the US are ones where employers are frequently requiring a degree. So given the fact that fewer than 50% of workers have one, we've seen this absolutely wild impact, which is that in the United States today, a STAR must work 30 years to earn the same wage as a college graduate earns on the first day of work. That inequality is new in the United States. So a skills-first approach really means that we're moving away from a traditional focus on education and actually focusing on years of experience and moving away from what previous employers a worker has had, what years of experience they've had, and instead focuses on what specific skills are needed to do the actual job for hiring. It opens up the aperture for many employers as they're thinking about a qualified pool of workers for their roles.
So a quick follow-up for you, Papia. When you say this to potential employers who you might be working with to get people jobs, help them get jobs, how do they react? Do they say, no, we want to have academic qualifications. We feel there is a need to have academic qualifications from the people we hire?
I think one of the things that's so important about this is that higher education, all across the globe has been a critical pathway to higher wages in the United States, everywhere, right? That has to continue to be the case. Part of what I think many employers have overlooked is the volume of workers they're not seeing by requiring a degree. And I think that's the first insight for many of them is just, oh, I didn't realize I was overlooking so many. And I didn't realize so many of the populations I'm trying to bring into my workplace have been ones I've been screening out with the degree requirement.
Mariana Batista from Wind Europe, let's bring you in now. I wonder from what was just said there, how much does that tally with the wind industry?
It's very much the same, and just kind of also building off of Papia saying, we are moving away more so from these traditional job descriptions, and we absolutely have to. Particularly, I will speak not just on the wind energy sector, but more specifically on the renewable energies as a whole. Every single one is also struggling immensely with skilled workers shortage. So it's not just necessarily finding the talent, so sourcing that talent and, kind of pumping up that talent pipeline, but it's also having to deal with the workers that are currently in the workforce today. There's a lot, we talk a lot about these two key are buzzwords, reskilling and upskilling. Work on the job also have the necessary. You see with the technology is advancing so much, AI and digitalization also has a huge impact on the necessary skill sets, and you see that advancement as we come at. So it's not enough to just have the computers and the robots doing great work. You need to have the people behind them also being able to plan. It's very much so in the same. We see a huge difference, and this also has a massive impact on how we source talent.
A quick follow-up for you as well, Mariana. Would you recommend someone for a job then as a wind technician if they hadn't been to university?
Well, for one, wind technicians don't necessarily have to go to university. So that's also another, I would say, statement that's worth pushing through as well. Indeed, many do need to have engineering backgrounds, but most of the jobs that we're actually forecasting from now until 2030, about 50% of that is really just technicians, electricians, and they can go through the vocational route, the training center route, so not necessarily having to go through a higher education. But I think we'll touch upon that a little bit more on what that means in terms of the values. Do we then recognize this with the same form of value as, for example, higher education and getting a degree from universities?
Thank you so much for that. Let's bring in Daniel McCabe, World Skills Champion. Daniel, when it comes to vocational education, are students even being taught the right skills for the job market of the future currently?
Yeah, that's a really good point. One thing I wanted to mention, no, they're not. Like, I think the job market, one thing that really interests me about it is it's it's incredibly dynamic, yet our education system is very rigid. I can't speak for all cultures, but from my experience, at least, education is very slow to adapt, and industry moves incredibly fast. Even in my sector, like where we're fortunate enough to have educational institutions running degrees targeted directly at our industry, we're getting people and having to immediately retrain them because what they're being taught at university, we've already innovated on there like 3 years in the past. And if you're trying to be at the forefront of something, like you ultimately, you're not hiring as much for those hard skills as you are those soft skills. And one thing as well, like, so in the world skills like ecosystem, we have like, so I can't even remember the amount of skills. I wouldn't want to underdo it, but there's hundreds of them. And there's the biggest skill that we all have in common that I've noticed in the community is like the soft skills and intrinsic motivation of learning. Like the ability of the people in the world skills community and those young competitors to actually learn is incredible. For example, we had like a gold medal florist that I knew very well from New Zealand. She's now a car mechanic, and she's just as good at being a car mechanic as she was a florist. And that's not because she knew how to be a florist. She understood how to learn, so she could apply that to anything she was passionate about. And ultimately, if you're passionate about what you're learning about, you're going to push it to the end. One thing I like to say a lot is a few generations ago, maybe people looked to their local cities for jobs. Now, the students of today, with the improvements in technology and like, you know, things like Google Translate, Google Maps, the ability to communicate and learn new languages, we look at neighboring continents rather than cities for careers rather than jobs. And that's something that stands out a lot, that it really isn't about how static the education system is, it's how dynamic the job market is.
And Daniel, just a quick follow-up for you. With a lot of the people you know or work with, do they have experiences where they're turned down for jobs without even maybe getting an interview because they don't have a university degree? And if that is the case, what do you say to them? What do you do to try to help them move forward?
No, for example, like I would say like 80% of my colleagues have degrees, but I don't. I went through the world skills route where I was self-taught. I really loved that statistic earlier that 41 to 60% of people are in informal education. That's how I felt. Like I was self-teaching on YouTube basically, and now I'm in a senior position at one of the leading games companies in the world. Like it doesn't matter the degree, and I'm proud that a lot of the people in our industry understand that, and they very quickly look past the CV and look to the person underneath it.
Thank you so much for that. I don't want to predict what Jose is going to say, but I'm going to bring in Jose Betancourt from Nodo Training Center at Columbia's EFIT University. And I imagine, Jose, you agree with what was just said, that more and more you are seeing people being able to get into jobs where they have the skill set, and that's what's most important.
Totally. What Dan said, the companies have to retrain people was one of the first concerns that we try to solve. We connect with a lot of companies to figure out what they need and what they really need, because yes, as he point, the universities and the education system is very medieval. We are very slow doing those things. So we as university, we think how we could disrupt ourselves. So we figure out something like what Papia told. We had to focus on the skill sets and what the skill sets need for day one. And we create what we call minimum viable employee. And for that, we are very specific on what they need. Probably they are not going to be successful in the long term, but because we need also to train them in the power skills. They will used to be called soft skills, but some of the companies tell us, yeah, they need to communicate, they need to know feedback. Even in the previous slides from the LinkedIn, the Gen Z, the company said I could not work with them, of the millennials before of that, but we moved to teach them how to communicate, to solve problems, and learn to learn. So lifelong learning skills, and we help them in the first model just to have this minimum viable employee, and from them, they learn in the job. So we put them in some companies and then learn more skills, and we help them to be successful.
Yeah, tell us a bit more about Nodii, because as I understand it, you offer stackable credentials for young people, primarily, I think, to break into the tech and AI industry. So are you seeing more people with stackable skill sets being considered for jobs than, say, 5 years ago?
Yeah. What we do is like a certification process. So if they want to start in the digital transformation stuff like software development, data and analytics, cybersecurity, and UX experience, so the person start with the first module, and each one of those journeys we help them to create like what is the minimum viable employee. But from that, we create like a cartography of the person, because Mariana, Pia, Dan, they are very different persons. So we help them to be successful, because sometimes a lot of the students, they are very young to try to figure out what they want to do. Some of them want to be in the games industry, the others in the energy, or others in different industry, but we help them to figure out where they are going to be successful, like in the flow agenda with the psychologists. We accompany them with tutors, technology, AI systems, and so on. So we help them to create their own chart of his life. So they start and they move with different certifications. At the end of the whole program, but with us, they have like a degree, but this is an informal degree, and the companies love what we achieve with them. What are the skills that the person collects going through Nodii, and the experience, because part of what we do, they solve challenge. So they are doing in the job with other 5 guys or girls, that it's a teamwork. So we, from the beginning, from day one, we tell them that a successful person is not a rock star, but a teamwork person that figure out that the project is first, that the company, that you have a higher level solution. So they move from that.
Thank you so much for that, Jose. And I see Mariana Batista is nodding there. So let's talk about what problems a skills-first approach can solve. And Mariana from Wind Europe, what's your perspective on this? What are the key challenges that the wind renewable energy sector faces in terms of skills needs?
For sure. Thank you for the question. I mean, just to bring a bit more context and just go back to what I was saying, you know, renewable energy sectors are facing a shortage in skilled workers. So I can give you some numbers. Right now in wind specifically, we have about 307,000 people, both direct and indirect jobs working in wind. And we expect this to go up to 600,000 by 2030. So that's a huge difference. We don't all have to be mathematicians to understand that this is doubling the workforce. So that's, you know, those are the facts and figures that we are dealing with. But in Europe, you know, there are other added factors. We have an aging population, and we also just have jobs that many people don't want to take up. So there's also quite a bit in terms of work that we have to do to bring more awareness to the industry. And, you know, these are all things that are set up against us. And of course, we have to get people in, and we have to get them in very quickly. So what we're seeing is we're looking a lot at transferability of skill sets. So actually moving people from one sector to the next. A very good example is oil and gas sector. So this, of course, is also a sector that eventually, with time, will become obsolete as we move away from fossil fuels. And we've been looking at those specific profiles and trying to identify how many of those skills can actually be transferred over to offshore wind, for example. They're working in similar environments. There are specific skill sets, even some of the health and safety certifications that can also be transferred over. So we see this a lot with other sectors, and we're really trying to understand what can be borrowed, because it's not just, as I said, you know, getting more people into that talent pipeline. We also have to deal with the issue right now. So that's one of the challenges, but also some of the solutions. And I think at the end of the day, it's really just trying to also look at more of an intersectional approach. As I mentioned, digitalization is huge. When we survey our members, we represent the entire value chain. And when we survey all of them, whether it is a manufacturer, developer, you name it, digitalization is always one of the top skill sets that they're looking for. So it's really ensuring that, you know, that specific skill is being taught, whether it is in the vet school, whether it's a training center, and really across all the different job profiles.
And out of interest, how successful is the wind industry in doing that in finding people from the oil industry, for example, who might have transferable skills and convincing them to shift lanes, so to speak?
There's a lot of great programs that are popping up. Oil and gas is not the only one. We see this also with a lot of coal miners, for example, especially in areas where the coal mining may be shutting down. You have training centers that are coming and ensuring that those individuals are not going to, run out of a job or not have a job from one day to the next, but really utilizing that skill set that they have and transitioning into another sector. And these programs are everywhere, and it's great, and it's really all across Europe, and we also see it beyond.
Thank you so much for that. Let's bring Papia de Broy back in from Opportunity at Work. Papia, holding an academic qualification, as discussed, is often a minimum requirement for professional roles and for career advancements. Do you think that is going to change entirely?
I think there are some occupations where the role of the degree is very important. And I think it's important to recognize, in the United States right now, if you look at occupations like physician, lawyer, you see very few workers who have been skilled through alternative routes. I think in addition to that, though, it's important to recognize that other than about 5 occupations in the United States, there is a star in every other job. And that's such an important signal, right? Because it effectively there are millions of proof points that workers have gained skills through pathways outside of college and are successful in these higher wage occupations. And I think one of the things that is so critical about that is an understanding that when we tear the paper ceiling, we open up economic opportunity to so many other other populations in the United States. We launched a campaign to tear the paper ceiling in the US about a year ago. The paper ceiling to us represents an invisible barrier, the degree screens, the biased algorithms, the stereotypes, the professional networks that block career opportunities for more than half the workforce. And we do think by tearing the paper ceiling, there's a way to think about what the future state of the workforce could look like in the US that is far more inclusive.
It's funny you mentioned AI screening there. A friend of mine was just telling me about a job they went for where they knew that it was AI was screening all the applications before it went to a human being. And if you didn't match almost exactly every single term on the job specification, then your application wouldn't be seen by a human. How big an issue do you think that's going to be going in the future, given that we are moving into an ever more AI-dominated world?
I think right now I have a lot of empathy for the employer here, right? We've been kind of practicing this motion of screening because the volume of applications for an average job has gone up so much in the last 25 years. And so we do need to have different ways of helping our employers actually understand, do workers have the skills required for these roles? I think one of the things that's also exciting about that opportunity is how we think about the ways people have gained skills and the ways that we measure and operationalize that. And I think that's one of the areas where the move forward and how we think about data is actually pretty exciting there. We can start to effectively give credit to workers for gaining skills through many different pathways and effectively start to bring some more nuance to how we think about that screening process. So overall, I think there are tremendous implications to be thinking through as we deploy AI in many different ways. For workers, though, there are some plus sides in how we think about the measurement and operationalization of their skills through these different pathways and showcase them to employers.
Thank you so much, Papia. Let's bring Daniel McKay from World Skills back in. Daniel, how do you ensure the credibility and standardization of skills if they're being acquired through a non-academic pathway? How do you make sure that employers can judge the quality of those skills?
Yes, it's really, I'm glad you brought me in here because this is something that's really important to our industry. So my day job is working in the games industry. And there's an incredible variety of skills there. And naturally, as I mentioned before, we don't always look at the CV as like a valid piece of data in the assessment of a candidate. So we've came up with other methods. So for example, if you're in an art role, it's not uncommon to be given an art brief and you get asked to do the brief. And that's your test. It's like an art test. And then programming as well. There's also programming tests, like here's a bunch of code, find the issues with it. And then equally, there's some more niche, obviously, but maybe we'll see it on the rise more and more as generative AI becomes better at coding. What if we were to, let's say we were trying to hire someone, create a website that for a cybersecurity engineer, and the only way to get through to the application form is to hack the website. And there's that's a more engaging like method as well. It's not just a blanket application, because we're probably going to start finding people in the programming sector and software engineering sector just writing AIs that will go and apply for jobs for them. Just scan LinkedIn, find every job, look at the background of the company, write me an application for it. Here's my CV, cross-reference it with that, and then boom, you put out like 1,000 applications in 10 minutes without even like, you know, you're still having your lunch. So it's going to be important for employers to adapt the way that they like vet candidates. And I think these kind of tests, they're engaging as well. Like if I'm, let's say me, for example, I could use an AI to do my art test in theory, but if they came up with a really creative brief, then I've found a company that suits me more. So it's going to be a way of companies finding candidates that suit them better, not just these blanket AI candidates that could even be fake. Like, you know, they might be good at doing AI, but the second they get into the role, they probably just have an AI run the job for them. It's going to change the way that technology is used, and I'm very fearful. I think coming back to my comment before about education being rigid, I think some industries are rigid to it as well. Like I think it's going to shock the world more than we already have. Personally, I'm excited. I think it's going to change the way that we work and collaborate. It's going to put a lot of people in a position where they have to reskill, and that's why soft skills are going to be the most important thing in the future society, because like your ability to adapt to find a role that fulfills you as an individual is going to become more and more prevalent.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. Really interesting. And I saw various members of the panel nodding at the same time as well, including Jose Betancourt. So let's bring him back in. Your reflections on what Daniel just said, and also I'd like to ask you, our students in Nodo, are they finding that there are employers out there who, as Dan said, there's certain ones who you're just not going to change their mind. They want to see an academic qualification.
Yeah, 83% of my students have been doing the cross to the industry, so they have a job right now. And the way they apply to the job, because sometimes they are just making the first model 3 months, and they apply to senior level software developers from some technology, and they are success in just being in that short time getting that kind of job, but because what Dan said, because they know how to solve some of the tests these companies make them to do. And what we try to do with them is like algorithm, software testing, software development, and so on, is trying to really know what you are solving, what the problem it is, making questions. Some companies said that to us, they were the candidates that make the great questions, not the ones that go and coding without ask anything, but they learn to do this kind of path, and the companies need those persons, not the ones that take the backlog and one task and do the task blinded, but the ones that think critical about those kind of things. So Duncan, what we are trying to do with our students is just that they focus on the communication skills, the working skills, and we leverage that, and the technology side of a lot of these things they can learn by them, and they learn by doing. So we focus on what they really need to be successful in the industry, like what I had said before, the minimal viable skills that they need to enter that industry, and so on. They move from that. So what we try to do really is to move those kind of things. And one of the questions in the chat was with the high level education, because one thing is the person that is going to enter the industry, but what happened with the schools, and where we are trying to do with the schools is teach them that they don't need to create new curriculums from each new technology, AI curriculum, coding curriculum, and so on, but how do we include these things in nature, science, history curriculums. So the students learn these new skills by doing the previous stuff. So we leverage that kind of conversation, that they could argue, that they could know how to interact with others.
Thank you so much for that, Jose. And thank you to everyone who is getting involved in the chat. Jose mentioned it just there, some of the questions coming in. I'm going to read out a few of the comments. Theo Charius Cromidas has written, higher education is not a servant for the labour market. There is absolutely no reason the purpose of higher education to be 100% aligned with what industry wants, which is essentially and primarily profit. Olusola Apalua says that one of the essences of higher education is to contribute to the economy and societal development. And another participant states that skills jobs have less salary than degree education, or at least that is the perception. Is that still true today? Papier de Broy, maybe I'll bring you in here. Is that still true today? I think it was actually mentioned in one of the presentations. Are skills jobs, in general, do they have a salary which is lower than those who have a degree educated job?
I think in aggregate, you do see a distinction in what wages for bachelor's degree candidates look like relative to workers who do not have a bachelor's degree in the United States. I think one of the things that's important to recognize, though, is that where those workers are distributed varies quite a bit by jobs, and you see workers who don't have the degree in jobs that are pretty high wage as well in the United States. So I would just separate the worker from the job there, because workers are gaining skills through many pathways. If it's okay, I also want to address Theo Charas's question here about assuming the labor market is only for private companies, because this is an area where I do think it's been really fascinating to see what's been happening in the United States. The public sector has actually been the first mover here in the US. We've seen 21 states in the United States actually remove degree requirements from public sector jobs. And what we're starting to see is that there's a trickle effect into the private sector as a result of that. So to us, that's a really important signal coming from the public sector side. Hey, we do want to open up these roles to other workers within our communities and ensure that the public sector is actually representing the communities it's serving. Thanks,
I wonder
Duncan.
if anyone else on the panel wants to come in on that. Do they see the public sector taking more of a skills-based approach to their hiring practices or not? Anyone want to come in on that? Mariana, Jose, Daniel? No one. We'll let the question hang. Oh, there we go. Jose, go for it.
What we have been seeing here is not directly that they are using in the hiring, but they are proficient doing that in the region areas. When your city is not in a regular high level city, but it's a small area, they are doing that because the level of higher education in the regions and the countryside of that is lower, and they hope to improve this by moving to this kind of study and this kind of even boot camps and another high speedy education that they could use from that, because that connects with one thing that Dan said in his first comment. That's you don't have to work in your local area. So I am seeing that the public sector is understanding that. So in the regional level, they see that they can have a very high level software developer living there, and his money, his new job, and those kind of things became aspirational to the people in the local, so they could change the economic side of the countryside.
Thank you for that, Jose. And Sarah Steinberg writes, she has a fun fact. She says you can become a lawyer through an apprenticeship in the US state of Vermont. So obviously in that state in the US, it is moving in a skills direction. Mariana Batista, in the wind energy industry, overall, do you think in 10 years' time is it going to be predominantly skill-based approach, or is it still going to be a lot of CVs needing to have academic qualifications from a university being a requirement?
I think it will really depend on the profile. But what we are seeing, I mean, it really comes down to having this open communication. It's already been alluded to in some of the other comments, and that's where kind of the trade association has to step in to bring in the universities to speak directly to the industry, the ones that are actually hiring the students afterwards, the vocational schools and the training centers, to really understand, okay, here at this company, we need skill A, B, C. Can you please ensure that you are training for that? I would see over time the roles, the key profiles, that could be the technicians, that can be the electricians, that can be those work program, like the data programmers, so on and so forth. Eventually, this is all going to be skills based, just because there won't be the necessity to have the specific degrees that come with it. But indeed, it's not to say that other roles, this will be eliminated altogether. There are certain engineering roles that you will have to have those specific degrees. But again, it really goes down to, and this is what Daniel was also saying, that we see that education is not fast enough. When there are any kinds of adaptations in the time that it takes to implement, by the time those students are, educated and certified and ready to go back and go out into the workforce, it's already too late. The industry has moved on. They're now onto the next advancements of some other type of technology, having them to reskill and upskill. So you really need to see that communication, the collaboration happening in real time, as opposed to having that 3 to 5 years gap, which we're trying to slowly close in by bringing all of these individuals around the same table.
Thanks again for that, Mariana. And Daniel, Mariana mentioned you in her answer, so I want to come back to you. What are the gaps in support for young people that you see, particularly those skilled through non-traditional paths?
I think some of the issues. So something I faced early in my career is if you get into a position where you're lucky enough to find what you really enjoy and you progress really fast in these like technical skills and they're all relevant, you end up entering the industry. In my case, I entered the industry at 18, where a traditional entry point would be like mid to late 20s. I was working with people all in their 30s and 40s. And I just got dropped in at 18. All my friends are at university, and culturally, that's a big shock to an 18-year-old to be put into that environment where I've gone from my friends wanting to play football after we finish college to now they're leaving at 4 o'clock on the dot to go and spend time with their family and kids. And I think that's something that isn't like, if you are successful in, like, I'm obviously like a niche where like it really worked for me, the system. But if we refine the system to a point where it's working really well, it's important that we develop the skills of maturity and things like that as well, because it was something I had to learn incredibly fast because I was still like a kid in a very grown-up world. And yeah, it's just something that should be mentioned, I think. And there's in terms of actually trying to get to that point where you can try and narrow the gap between what reskilling, because whenever you bring someone into a company, you're going to have to onboard them, right? It's just trying to minimize that onboarding period. There's an incredibly successful program in Sweden called TGA within our industry, and how they do it is they have their course taught by their traditional lecturers that would normally teach a university course, but they only teach a third of it. And then the industry, so like about EA, Ubisoft, and a couple of other like major companies in the games industry, they got together and found some of their members of staff who were like completely up to date on all modern working practices and went, right, let's scrap the NDA and actually teach these guys what's important to us. Otherwise, we're going to have no one to hire in 3 years. So that's what they did, and they sent their like people like me who are working in the industry every day, sent people like us in to teach the courses. And then you ended up with like this incredibly up-to-date student base where I think 98% of their students got hired straight into an industry role, whereas a typical university course would see something more like, well, it's more like 10%, but they'll say they went like, we get 100% into an industry role, but 100% people went into the tech space, but 10% actually went into the job that they were looking to get when they entered. So there's always this like manipulation of numbers. The reality is when you look at university course data on who actually gets into the industry, it's usually inflated based on the reality of it.
So Jose smiling there and nodding. Is that something you've seen as well, Jose?
Yeah. What Daniel said is very true, because some of my competitors show some numbers, and at the end, the person enter the industry, but not what they were looking for. That's very difficult to say, because at the end is the impact, and some things they said, yeah, but they get a job. No, but that's not the reality. And also what Dan said, that you could do this by bringing the experts. So that's one of the change that you have to make. Sometimes we don't have time to prepare the teacher, and the teacher is the one that is going to do the trainee, because the technology is moving so fast that if you prepare someone, that's not what you are going to be teaching at that moment. So one of the changes that the university has doing with Nodo program is that we remove that role. So we remove the professor, the teacher role. Would we change that with a tutor that is from the industry, that has to have more than 3 or 5 years in that specific area? And when you have that connection, he is going to do what he does best in the daily job. He's a leader in his company. He know how to review code. He know how to accompany some of the coworkers and so on. So in the study area, they are going to do that. And the learning is moving to the student, and the student has the responsibility to do that, because sometimes also we see that the people has different ways to learn, YouTube and a lot of different topics, but they mimic what the teacher said. So when you challenge that in a real challenge, they don't know how to do it, because they're always figure out a mimic in the high level teacher. So they don't have like that template.
Thank you very much for that, Jose. Papia de Broy, something we haven't spoken about yet, the role of government. What should governments be doing to promote skills first?
I think there's a few different roles that government can play at this moment. I think the first is, in the US, we're seeing the government effectively act as the largest employer in the country today. So, their decisions to remove degree requirements and start to think about skills that have been gained through alternative routes in their own workforce is a first really important signal in the labor market. I think second is, obviously they play an incredible role in society as a policymaker, and where we assign our budgets and how we think about the future state of how we ensure that skills gained through any pathway can be translated to earnings over time is such a critical piece of, such a critical way of ensuring that we're setting up our workers for the next generation as effectively as possible. I think the third role that they play that's actually really critical here in the US is as a convener of employers, to help them see what role they're actually playing in regional labor markets to ensure access to opportunity and improve economic well-being, right, in their regions. And so I think those three roles are really important moving in to this next century, and will really set the standard for what it looks like to ensure that learning can translate to earning wherever you've gained those learnings.
Thank you so much for that. We are running fairly low on time, so I'm going to thank all the people sending in their comments. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to get through any more of your comments and questions, but quickly for the panel, just to get your final thoughts. If a skills-first approach is the correct direction of travel for the future of education, how are you going to shift mindsets to change the mindsets of some students, of some parents, some employers, to realize how important it is to focus on skills in many circumstances? Maybe we can start with Mariana Batista.
Thank you, Duncan, for the question. Very important. Indeed, mindset is really what it comes down to. As in Europe, we spend actually a lot of our efforts on, communicating the importance of the industry, bringing more awareness. And it's really not just knocking on door to door. There's different avenues we have to take. As you have just noted, parents are very important. So making sure you're also communicating with them and letting them know that, the value of education, having a great job doesn't mean you're only going to university. You can also get a great job by going to vocational training and non-formal training. And a lot of this also has to do with starting even earlier, going to students when they're between the ages of 10 and 12, if not earlier. This also has, touches a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure there are more girls at a young age, also those who are from minority groups already studying STEM. making sure that they also understand that the different profiles and career paths that are available to them at a younger age, and not when they're about to choose whether or not they go to university or vocational training school. So those two avenues are very important. So it's not just going to the parents as well with pamphlets, but it's also making sure that the teachers have the right resources in their classrooms to also be educating about these new topics.
Thank you very much, Mariana. And Daniel McCabe, same question to you. How are you going to change mindsets to make more people consider a skills-first approach to employment?
Yeah, it was something that initially I didn't have much support in my own career. Like I was like, why aren't you doing university, Dan? Why are you going down this games route? You're actually going to make a job of it. And I was trying to explain it and I didn't really get very far. So particularly my grandparents were very difficult to persuade. Like, not that I needed their permission, but I wanted them to support me in any case. And the way I solved the problem was I took a grayscale photo from like their wedding, like 50, 60 years ago, and colorized it for them. And then I gave them a VR headset, and then they were like, oh, okay, all right, we see that this is the future now. And I used that as a tool to kind of demonstrate it rather than trying to convince.
This is where I would not be able to in any way succeed doing something similar, but thank you for sharing that story.
Well, and if you want to use that as a tool, there's AI tools now that will color photos for you, so you can just use that.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Jose Betancourt, what about you? How are you going to change mindsets to support a shift in attitudes to skills first?
We are working together with the companies to show them that they could hire in this way. So having more success stories, because as you appointed in the question, the parents, how they choose if you are going to run a long track or just this small track is going to be where his son, girl is going to be higher. So we need more and more success stories of these people enter the industry and doing as successful stories.
Thank you so much, Jose. And Papi de Broy, a final word from you.
I think it's so important to find a star that you know. So many of us know someone who didn't gain their skills through higher ed, and I would just encourage you to go understand them from that lens and see just how skilled they are and what it would look like to unlock their potential. It might be your sister, it might be your parent, it might be your neighbor, but that's a good place to start.
Thank you so much. And before we say goodbye, the OECD's Ivan Bornicelli is going to join us for a final comment. So Ivan, there he is. Over to you.
Thank you, Duncan. This has been definitely a very interesting conversation to follow. Thank you so much for all the panelists. So we heard today from our panelists and in the chat that many different industries are facing skill shortages, renewable energies and tech being some of the standouts. So skill-first approaches in the labor market, such as dropping the degree requirements in job applications, can really boost and help everybody. As Papia mentioned, they can help individuals skill through alternative routes and other job seekers, such as the Black and Hispanic communities in the United States, gain access to those jobs that they were previously screened out of, especially those with high wages. At the same time, Mariana spoke about how Skill First can foster industry cooperation to address dynamic labor demands in the renewable energy sector and even beyond. Dan spoke out that is key to foster greater compatibility with the skills that people are taught in national education system and what is demanding on the labor market. Jose highlight the fact that the skill-first approach doesn't aim necessarily overlook or substitute formal education, such as higher education. Instead, the objective is to bring skill development through alternative way at the same level. And as Shara mentioned, generative AI will only exacerbate the pace of changes and skill demand. So this has been kind of like my general points based on the conversation. And just to share, as for the next step for our project, we will publish a blog on how skill-first approaches can address skill shortages. And you will find the link on where it will be published in the chat. And for October, we're organizing a workshop in Berlin to learn more about how current skill-first approaches in the labor market look like, how they support the skill development, how they can help individuals develop a skill-first mindset. And you can, if you're interested to learn more and participate on this, please reach out. My email is in the chat, or through the send out that will be on the webinar recording that will be shared after the webinar. Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you so much, Ivan, and thank you to LinkedIn's Sharat Raghavan for his presentation at the start as well. Thank you to all our panelists, Daniel McCabe, World Skills Champion, Mariana Barista from Wind Europe, Jose Betancourt from NODU at EAFIT University, and Papia De Broy from Opportunity at Work. Thank you too to the production team, all those working behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. It's harder work than you might think. And also, please do watch out for next week, where you can join us virtually for the launch of PISA 3, which for the first time assess creative thinking skills in 15-year-olds from right around the globe. There's loads of interesting findings, and that is going to take place from 9:45 Paris time next Tuesday. Please do join us for that. Thanks again for all of you joining us, and hope to see you soon. All the best.